when Jesus was alive, when Jesus was ministering. Okay? One of the last conversations that Jesus had on this earth was with Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate asked Jesus a question. What is truth? And it's a good question. What is truth? And how do you determine truth? Okay? And that's going to be the basis for our first class today. Because this has a very definite impact on what it is that we're going to teach going forward, and what it is that we focus our lives on as Lutheran Christians. Okay? Where do we find the truth? All right? Some folks say that you can find truth with this, with faith. Other folks say that no, you can only find the truth using what? Science, right? What does our culture say? What do people in general put more stock in? Hey, there's a study and theologians say this, or hey, there's a study and scientists say this, right? We tend to gravitate more towards the science because we believe that it's science that points the way to what is real, and we make the assumption that all the things that are real are kind of synonymous with this, with truth, okay? Whereas when it comes to faith, and it's because there are so many different and varied faiths, right? That while we try and be respectful of people's faith, we don't make the same connection between faith and truth as we do between science and truth. Now, as Christians, since we believe in God and we trust in His Word, we also believe that there is an adversary, Satan, okay? And this is just my opinion, since Satan's job, in Scripture, Satan is a title. It means the accuser. Jesus calls him a deceiver, that when he lies, he speaks his native language. And in our context, where we are here in the U.S. of A., November 2022, Satan has worked hard to get truth associated with science, okay? And I am going to try and disagree where it comes to truth, all right? And you've heard in my prayers, I'm certainly a biased source, that I believe that truth comes from this, not from this, all right? Now, one of the things I love about our Lutheran faith is when it comes to what we believe, we don't simply say this is what we believe. We also get detailed as to why we believe it. And so that's what this class is about. I'm going to try to explain why I believe that truth is found through faith and not from science. Okay? Now, the prophet Habakkuk. We rarely preach about Habakkuk, a tiny little book in the Old Testament, right? But Habakkuk is the first one who God used to write the phrase or the saying, we live by faith, not by sight. All right? And so you'll notice that our lesson for today is entitled that, Live by Faith and Not by Sight. The Apostle Paul repeats, he quotes Habakkuk, and he says that the righteous live by faith, not by sight. Because what we can see, right, with our eyes, which would fall under the science category, does not always reveal what is true, what is really going on. Okay, so if I were to ask you what a worldview is, what would you answer? Lloyd, what would you answer if I would say, what is your worldview?
Well, the way somebody views the world.
All right, so it's the way someone views the world, okay? Our worldview is our automatic set of presuppositions, all right? Things that we take for granted are true before we have any discussion whatsoever. So again, I'm a huge U of M fan. So if we have a discussion on what program is better, Michigan or Michigan State, I'm not objective, I'm already biased, right? And so that's what your worldview is, just the set of your presuppositions that you enter into any conversation, any argument with, okay? You may think that since there are 7 billion plus people on this earth, or is it 8 now? I forget.
As of Tuesday, 8.
As of Tuesday, there are 8. You would think that there are 8 billion different worldviews, right? Because everyone's a little bit different. But in reality, you can boil them down into 2 categories. All right? Natural, which means all there is matter, material, stuff that you can see and feel, right? Or they're supernatural, that there is more than just matter. There's more than just nature. In this worldview, everything must be explained by a natural process. Everything must be explained by a natural process, okay? So in this natural worldview, there is no God, right? Because God is outside of nature. Does that make sense so far? Now, I forgot one ground rule. The one ground rule is that I don't want to talk constantly the entire time, okay? Adults learn best with discussion. There are no dumb questions. So if anything that I say is not making sense, we need to be a little more clear. Please, 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 I am begging, ask. Interrupt me, love questions, okay? So in this worldview, there is no God. And in this worldview, God exists. Now, we're being very general at this point, okay? We're not yet to the Christian God, all right? We're just saying that the possibility of God exists, that there's something outside of nature. So again, you'll notice that these 2 worldviews are mutually exclusive. If this one's true, if the natural worldview is true, then this one is false. And if this one is true, then this one is false. Okay? There's no compromising between these 2. It's one or the other. Okay? Susan.
But I would argue that science is not all factual, that it is based on, when you do scientific studies, people are involved and people are biased. And no matter how you set the parameters for studies, experiments, there's always going to be that one factor or 2 factors where there's going to be a bias because there's people. And not only that, science has some faith to it, because when you get up in the morning, you have to believe that gravity is real. That when you put your feet out on the floor, that you're not just gonna float in space, that you have to believe that gravity is real.
All right. So you've jumped ahead to like the last 5 minutes
Oh,
of
no,
my talk.
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. It is quite all right. So I'm not gonna, just as I say, ask questions, interrupt me. I love questions. I'm gonna put off your
Okay,
comment until a little bit later, because we're going to get there.
okay.
But at the end of this, I'm going to agree with you 100%, right? Because I already said that I believe that truth is found here, not here, okay? But Satan likes to have us believe that truth is found only here. So if I were to assign a category for these worldviews, you'd put the natural worldview under science, right? That's a reasonable place to put it. And you'd put the supernatural worldview under faith, very reasonable place to put it, okay? And again, because our culture is increasingly secular, that means outside of the church, our culture frequently looks to science as the source of what is true, okay? However, there's a little bit more than to the story, okay? How many types of science are there? Hang on, I didn't say disciplines, types. And I'm gonna be very broad and say of all the disciplines that exist in science, you can break them down into 2 categories, okay? Observable science and historic science, okay? Observable and historic. Tom, give me an example of observable science.
Action equals reaction.
Testable, repeatable, falsifiable. So when you were in school, they taught you the scientific method, right? You make a hypothesis. So my hypothesis is if I take some baking soda and pour it into a little jar of vinegar, something's gonna happen, all right? That's your hypothesis. So then you move on to what? To the testing. And you take your baking soda and you pour it into vinegar, which is an acid. And then you might say, oh, wow, they had a reaction, right? Because you get a nice reaction. And then you can say, well, baking soda is a base and vinegar is an acid, so I wonder if it's just a reaction between something that's a base and something that's an acid, right? And so then you repeat it, you do it again, okay? And then you can also falsify it. What happens if I put baking soda in water? Well, the answer is nothing, because water is neutral, no reaction, okay? But that is observable science. It follows the scientific method, all right? You can see it, you can test it, you can repeat it, okay? Folks, that is,
He said Hiroshima.
yeah, that is good science, right? That is good science. Because the folks who developed the splitting of the atom had to do what? They had to test it, they had to repeat it, they certainly were able to falsify it, you know. This is kind of like, you know, Thomas Edison, you know, finding 1,000 different things that don't make a light bulb, okay? Guys, that's good science. This is science that we as Christians applaud. Love this kind of science, okay? However, there's also another category of science, and that is called historic science, okay? Because historic science let me add another adjective here, observable, to, oh, that is observable science. Never mind. Historic science is not what? Is not science that is testable, repeatable, or falsifiable. So, Susan, if you happen to believe in a natural worldview that there is no God, and I would say, where did the universe come from? What would you tell me?
Oh, well, it's the Big Bang Theory, of course.
Okay, so that there was a smaller mass of matter, right? Matter, and it exploded, and from that you get the universe, all right? Is that observable science or historic science? Is that testable? No. Is it repeatable? No. Is it falsifiable? No, it's not.
They're
It's not.
trying to do it, but they
Boy.
haven't done it.
And it's not observable.
Right, and it's not observable,
It's
right?
kinda
So it
happened a long
happened,
time
it
ago.
happened so far in the past. And again, if you talk to a scientist who believes this, or someone who has a natural worldview, they'll use number like 14 billion years ago, okay? So that's historic science. And as Susan was explaining, historic science is the category where we as Christians say, wait, stop, okay? Time out. I have an issue with this. And not an issue based on our faith, but an issue based on the science itself. Where did that hunk of matter come from? Nobody knows. What made it go, right? And if it did go boom, what would you expect to see? What should be the results of that? Okay? And the answers are unknowable. The answers are unknowable. Scientifically, they are unknowable. And while you predicated the Big Bang by using the word theory, which means what? Unproven, right? This is taught in our culture as what? As fact, as truth. Okay? It is equated with truth. But the reality is what? The reality is that it's not truth. Scientists believe this is what happens. But gang, if I were to put the word believe, what page do I write that on? Faith.
Yes.
All right. Believe goes on this side. Believe goes on this side. Yes, Lord.
And maybe you are going to say this, but a lot of them will say they believe that because they've done these tests and because these tests say that, we think that it would result in that. So they are kind of using the actual natural testing. And all
They're
that.
trying. They're doing their absolute best.
Creating a giraffe out of an ant, kind of thing.
They're you know, again, they are doing their best. They're doing their best. But again, they're not going to overcome the parameters that these things are historic in nature. Okay? So, Susan, we're going to pick on you again. If you have a natural worldview, and I asked you, where did life on Earth begin? Or how did life on Earth begin? What would you answer? Again, there's no God in this, so it's got to be a natural process.
From the primordial sludge of, there's water, there was some type of spark that happened in the water with a cell that reproduced itself. And there is, again, it's a theory.
Okay, so is that theory, is that observable? Does that mean, can we test it? Can we repeat it? Can we falsify it? And the answer is no. So the origin of the universe falls under historic science. The origin of life falls under historic science, okay? And again, what you're looking for, Susan, is another big word, but I'm going to write it down here anyway. It's called abiogenesis. So,
But Genesis.
Genesis simply means
Yes,
beginning.
yes.
Right. So biogenesis is, bio is life.
Mhm.
So biogenesis means that life comes from life, right? A means it doesn't. So in this worldview, life on Earth had to be a result of abiogenesis, that there were simply amino acids floating around that somehow combined together to form a living cell that was able to survive and to reproduce itself. Okay? Now again, is this something that is testable? Well, they try.
Yeah, I say try.
They try, but again, every try has been a failure, right?
Move to the other side.
Is it repeatable? No. Is it falsifiable? And again, the answer is no.
Because every cell that they use comes from a living source that has not been created by the scientists.
So what we see, what we observe with our eyes, right? The good science is that life comes from life, right? Apple trees come from where? Apple trees. Okay? Koala bears come from where? Koala bears. Okay? Life comes from life. That's what we see. So, let's go to the supernatural side. And let's answer these questions according now to what our particular worldview is. And we're just gonna say that this is the God. Oh yes.
Can I just put in there that people will say, well, then what about all of the diverse parts of nature and, you know, and hybrids and that sort of thing? Well, a lot of that comes from indels, which are insertions and deletions in our biology. So you've got certain cells that sometimes, like we have as human beings, some things that are diseases that are genetic. And so in nature, there can be, from moving animals or people into a certain area where they can't mate with others, they may have some shifting. So
All right.
so that's where scientists are, and some scientists say, well, you know, we've got hybridization, so therefore, but as Christians, we can say that does happen. That is repeatable. You can actually repeat some of those things. Like if you made a horse and a donkey, you're gonna get a mule.
Right.
So that's repeatable.
Correct. Hold that thought. All right. So, if we're talking about the origin of life, again, this is abiogenesis. This is life coming from non-life. Then you talk about how do we get from that single cell, very simple, to very complex. And again, you will have folks that have a natural worldview say that, oh, that's the process of evolution. Okay? And we're going to get to that in a minute. All right? But let's go back on this side. I've written a lot over here. I want to write some over here. So the God of the Bible, if I were to ask you, what does the Bible say about where the universe came from? What is the answer? God spoke. Okay? So you have creatio ex nihilo. This is Latin, creation from nothing. That there was nothing except God, right? And fiat. Fiat is the spoken command, right? Someone speaks and it is done. My wife says, I want ribs for dinner. That means what? Go make me ribs. Yes, that's what it means. Okay? God spoke into nothing, and there was creation. Okay? Now again, I asked the question for the Big Bang theory, right? I said, where did that stuff, that ball of stuff, come from? And the answer was, don't know. You ask the same question. If there was nothing but God, where did God come from? And that's a question that has no answer, right? You can say that God is eternal, no beginning and no end, all right? But you'd have to assign the same characteristics to that big ball of stuff, whatever was at the beginning. So again, each worldview starts with what? An unanswerable question. They have that in common. Okay? What about life? Where did life begin according to the Christian Bible, our God? It was again created. Most of it was created from nothing, with the exception of what? What was created from something?
Woman.
People. Well, man and woman.
People.
Yeah, man, God took the dust, the dirt, and made man. And then from man, God made woman. All right? So you still have creation by fiat. Most of it was creatio ex nihilo. Whether it's the sun and the moon, or those are living. So you get plants, fishies, birds. God spoke them into being. Okay? And then the last thing, still God created, but mankind was made from stuff that he already made. Okay? But you see, it has a definite beginning. All right? It had a definite beginning. So I asked earlier how many types of science there were. Okay? And there are two, observable and historic. How many types of faith are there? I'll give you a hint. There are two. Okay, there are two. And those are reasonable and blind. Reasonable faith and blind faith. So Joe, do you like pulled pork?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta tell you, I make a pretty decent pulled pork. If I ever make pulled pork for you, you're gonna have seconds. Maybe even thirds, okay? And if I do that consistently enough, the next time I say to Joe, hey Joe, I'm gonna make pulled pork, Joe's gonna what? Joe's going to believe that he's going to get something good, right? Now, have I made it yet? No, I haven't. But his faith in my ability to make pulled pork is reasonable because why? Because he's tasted it. He's eaten it before. And every time I've done that, it's been good. All right? Vicki, how about you and I enter a math competition together? Solving advanced calculus equations. Sound reasonable? Sound good? All right, so, gang, Vicki and I are going to join a math competition where we're going to solve advanced calculus equations. All right? And we're going against PhDs from Harvard, MIT, Yale, okay? Tom, how are Vicki and I going to do? Are we going to win or lose? You pessimist. Said we're going to lose.
I agree.
Now,
I don't know your skills.
okay, you're right. You do not know my skills.
That's right.
But I will admit that I need to be barefoot to count up to 20, okay? Tom could have said, hey, you guys are going to win.
That's fair.
That is indeed faith. But what kind of faith is it? Is it reasonable faith or is it blind faith? It's blind faith, right? Because there is no evidence. Both of them are faith. They're both types of faith. But are they equal types of faith? And I'm going to say the answer is no. Okay? But now we've demonstrated that no matter what your worldview is, whether it's faith or science, both of them contains, if it's natural or supernatural, both of them contain elements of faith. All right? But because they both contain elements of faith, things that you have to believe even though they cannot be proven. So you talk to someone who has a natural worldview, they do believe in the Big Bang, even though it's not proven. And if I would talk to Mary and she would say, oh, I believe in the God of the Bible, even though it's not proven, right? Again, same condition. You believe something is true even though it's not proven. Both of those have elements of faith, but are they equal? And my contention and the reason for this class is that they are not equal. That one of these worldviews has a reasonable faith and one of them has a blind faith. Okay? So how do we determine which one is reasonable and which one is blind? All right? It's very simple. Whichever one has the evidence behind it would be the reasonable. The one that has no evidence behind it, that would be the blind faith. Okay? So, Susan, have we ever witnessed or recreated an act of abiogenesis, where life comes from non-life? The answer is no, we have not. And believe me, the brightest minds in this worldview have tried, desperately tried, to get life to form, okay, from non-life. And when you go back to the beginning of, the modern beginning of this, Charles Darwin and his followers, okay? If you read their writings, they made it sound quite easy, right? All these things just formed a very simple cell. Like a cell was some kind of very basic, primitive kind of a thing, okay? But Tom, our cells, even the most simple cell, are they basic and primitive? Yes or no? No. They are remarkably complex. They are more complex than any supercomputer that we have developed up until this point, okay? One of the interesting things about cellular biology is that the more you get into it, the more you realize what? There's so much more that we don't know. It's kind of like you think that you're filling in, like if this is the problem, right? And eventually you get enough answers and you start to fill it in. But then as you research it, you realize, wait a minute, there's more we don't know. And as you research it again, there's more we don't know. Okay?
There's even cells that will regenerate and cells that won't regenerate.
Even the most primitive amoeba-like cell is remarkably complex, okay? And so, abiogenesis is a blind faith. It's a blind faith, okay? But now in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, when God creates something out of nothing by the power of his word, and he says, reproduce after your kind. Okay? So, what do we now see with our eyes? What can we test, repeat, and falsify? Okay? So, what you see is that every living species, plant or animal, reproduces after its kind. Okay? Oh, reproduce. Susan, you mentioned variety, okay, within organic species. So, I went to the fruit market yesterday for my wife, and there were 18 different varieties of apples. Okay? That's because when information is passed from parent to child, one generation to the next, it is in their DNA, right? Sometimes there's a mutation. There's a mistake, and you'll get a little bit of a change, all right? And so that's what we see. You see a great deal of variety within species. This is important. Variety within species. This is called microevolution, okay? Just as you look at human beings, there is enormous variety within our species, okay? This is good science. This is stuff that you can repeat, you can test, you can falsify this if you wish. If you artificially attempt to inseminate a tiger with a hyena's sperm, what do you get? Nothing. You can't do it because they won't combine. It's falsifiable. But if you take within the same species, if you breed a lion, which is a cat, right, to a tiger, which is a cat, you get a liger. It works. It works. Okay? But what you see is you see things reproduce after their kind. If this is true, not only do you have to have microevolution, you have to have something called macroevolution, which means one species will change into another. Now, again, this has to fall into historic science because we don't see one species changing into another. They believe that this is what happened. Paul, what is the evidence for macroevolution? How many fossil forms do we have that are hybrid or in between critters, that are part dog and part cat? Because one species has to change into another. And the answer is absolutely zero. None. Not a one. Now again, you'll have claims, all right? But a claim is not what? Proof. A claim is not proof. You have zero proven, they're called transitional fossils, as one species transitions into another. You'll have zero. You'll get artist renderings. Are artist renderings settled science? No. They're an artist's what? Imagination. Okay? What we see with our eyes is this. Things reproduce after their kind. And there is variation because genetic information gets lost. Not gained, it gets lost. All right? You want something cheerful? The human race is going to go extinct in 20,000 years. Why? Because every generation loses a tiny bit more information than the one before it. Tom, your children have, on average, 64 more genetic mutations than you do. And you, on average, have 64 more genetic mutations than your parents. And they had 64 more genetic mutations than their parents. Now again, because you have literally billions and billions of bits of information, 64 is what? Grain of sand on a seashore. But they accumulate. And if they continue to accumulate at 64 genetic mutations, in 20,000 years, the human genome becomes non-viable. And we're going to go extinct. There you go. Cheerful.
But
Yes,
there
ma'am.
are some mutations that are actually beneficial, that we there are some mutations that happen and they help a species.
Give me one.
The ability, okay, so some insects didn't have a hard cover, and because they were in an area where they needed a hard cover in order to survive, there were some mutations that happened that increased that hard cover. They may have had some, but it increased it so that they were more viable in that environment. And we get mutations. Those are, besides the ones that are lost, there's ones that are added too. There's
I would.
insertions and deletions.
I understand there are insertions and deletions. But I would challenge your premise that environmental factors influence how genetic information is passed along.
Well, in the Himalayan mountains,
Uh-huh.
okay, the people who live there have a bigger capacity, lung capacity, and the Sherpas have more capacity for oxygen and for being able to absorb oxygen. And that's why they're used to carry things up the mountain for human beings who don't have that capacity. They actually have a larger capacity for getting oxygenated in their blood.
Okay.
So that was a good adaptation for their environment, that they have
Well,
that.
Or everyone else has lost
That could be too.
that information.
That could be too.
So when I was in college, I was taught that environment caused genetic mutations, all right? This is, how did giraffes get long necks? They were always what? Grazing for higher and higher and higher food, right? But, Susan, if you went the rest of your life, in fact, from the moment of your birth, if they tied your left arm behind your back and you never used your left arm, would your children be born with a left arm?
Yes.
Yes, right? Because your environment, your usage or non-usage, does not impact what DNA gets passed along to the next generation, okay? So, the point that I want to make is, and I'll give a caveat for Susan's additions, okay? But on the whole, almost without fail, every time you see some kind of evolution, some kind of mutation, it's nearly always negative and harmful.
I was just gonna say that these people in the Himalayas we were talking about,
Uh-huh.
couldn't they have simply, through their lives, living there because of the conditions, simply developed because they had to breathe deeper? Couldn't they have developed stronger lungs rather than just?
Well,
a
there's
mutation
actually
of-
scientific, there's some studies, so.
All right, so again, not by and large, nearly always, any mutation that you have is a negative. It's a loss of information. Even when it results in a change, it is a loss of information. And what you don't see in nature are any kind of substantial gains in information. You just don't see it, no matter what species that you study, okay? Why do scientists study fruit flies? Because fruit flies have very short lives, very short generations, okay? And they can track the mutations from one generation down to the next. They become visible to the eye after a while, okay? But what you never see is what? A gain in information. Every change is a loss. And by this point in time, they've had fruit flies experiments going on now for decades. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of generations, and you guess what? You still have fruit flies. All right? So, no evidence, zero, that macroevolution occurs.
Yeah,
None.
I'm not,
None.
Saying
But
that.
what you do see is microevolution.
Sure.
Okay? So, again, the reality is that no matter what your worldview is, they all rest upon faith. But in my opinion, it is the supernatural worldview, our God of the Bible, that is the reasonable faith. And the natural worldview, where there's only matter, there is no God, that one is a blind faith. And so going forward, again, knowing that every human being, their worldview rests upon some kind of faith, I'm confident that our reasonable faith puts us on the right road. And now going forward, we're going to say and be more specific and not just talk about any God. We're going to focus on the God of the Bible and why we believe that he is the true God. Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want you to understand.
Oh,
that
Susan,
I
I
don't
know.
believe in
I know. I
macroevolution.
trust you.
It's-
I trust you 100%. I get it. I knew where you were coming from.
Okay.
But again, be aware is that many times folks who have this natural worldview will use occurrences of microevolution to say, well, because we see this, that this is also true. And just again, be aware, that's kind of a bait and a switch. All right. I have gone beyond my time, which I know shocks you all. Thank you much.